This is Duke University.
So welcome everybody. This is the first class meeting of a class we're calling Surprise Endings, Literature and Social Science. Or if Dan Ariely were here and not just on the screen, he would say it's a class called Surprise Endings, Social Science and Literature. If you've already read the emails that I've been sending out, you've been warned that this is a very, very unusual class. And we think it's the first class of its kind, where students themselves are going to be turning the class and what we do in class into a public online forum, web forum. There are no exams. There are no term papers. In fact, your grade for the class will rest on weekly contributions to a public blog, as well as a project you do where you take one of the topics for the class, prepare something for us in the most exciting way you can think of to make a class for us on one of the topics and on the readings that we've assigned, and then turn that into something for the general public by the end of the class. We're lucky in that we have a whole team of people who I'll be introducing in a little bit, who will be here to help you, to teach skills, to move the class forward. This is a class in many, many different kinds of things that we're putting together in a way that the university rarely allows. And I'm going to talk about that content for a bit, and then I'll talk some more about method. This class came about because both Dan Ariely and I are very interested in a psychological concept called attention blindness, or sometimes called inattentional blindness. How many people have ever seen the famous video of people playing basketball and you're asked to count, right? There's 6 people playing basketball. 3 of them are wearing white shirts, 3 of them are wearing black shirts, and you, as experimental subjects, are asked to count how many times the basketball is passed only between people wearing the white shirts, right? How many people have seen that? Okay, so you know what happens. So once you know what happens, you can't believe that somebody else doesn't see this, but the first time you do it, about 65% of people don't see that in the middle of these 6 people throwing basketballs comes a girl. She was an undergraduate student at Harvard, dressed head to toe in a gorilla suit, right? She comes in right among the 6 graduate students who are tossing the basketballs. She stands on camera for 9.5 seconds. She beats her chest. She makes a little face at the camera, and then she strides off, right? Almost 70% of people do not see her. And the reason is, and this is the issue, this is what we're going to be talking about all term. We are so used to focusing attention on one thing that we forget that focused attention means we are unfocusing on everything else. So in some ways, our greatest gift as human beings, our ability to focus and to accomplish a task, right? You were given the task of counting those basketballs, right? How many basketball tasks are being tossed, right? We are good at that. We're so focused. We keep all other distractions away. We can count. The downside, anyone can say, what's the downside, right? You miss the gorilla. That's not just true of the attention, that famous attention blindness experiment. It's true of every aspect of life, right? When you're a little tiny baby, you don't focus. Right? An infant, a newborn infant, does not focus. By about 6 months, when you're starting to learn language, you're already seeing less and less. On a neurological level, most people assume, and that used to be assumed until about 20 years ago, that somehow your brain was making more and more neural connections as you grew up. In fact, an adult has about 40% less neurological connections than a baby. Why? Because attention is about making very efficient neural pathways that allow you to focus, that allow you to do a task, whether that's learning language as an infant or counting the basketballs, right? What does that also mean? It means you miss a lot that you're not being trained to see. Some of my favorite examples. Japanese babies, you know, if you watch any kind of racist movie about Japan, they make jokes about R and L, that Japanese can't hear the difference between R and L. I'll bet Japanese babies can hear the difference between R and L. As you learn Japanese, which is a language where there is not a phonetic difference between R and L, you lose the ability to hear that difference. You have to learn that again when you learn English. That's true for everything. There are vowels and consonants that native English speakers knew and could recognize and hear as infants that they lose as soon as they learn the English language. It's also true about everything else, right? When you're a baby, you're just fascinated, right? How many people have spent time with infants recently? Okay, right? If there's a rattle, you can do wonders with a rattle with a newborn baby, right? Because babies think rattles are important. Try to put a rattle in front of a 3-year-old, right? By age 3, you know a rattle isn't important. By age 5, you really know it isn't, right? So those fan blades, if you've ever seen a baby in a room with fan blades, there's grandpa trying to get love and attention from the baby. The baby's totally absorbed by the patterns of the that the fan blade is making. By about 6 months, babies know that fan blades aren't important to the people around them, and they stop paying attention to fan blades, right? In other words, our culture teaches us what's important and what isn't important, and that's what attention is. Attention is about paying attention, focusing, learning how to do the things your culture prizes as important. Downside, that's what we know from the gorilla experiment, you miss everything else. Dan Ariely, who's not able to be here today, has written a number of wonderful books that are based on experiments that social scientists construct to teach us all the things we think we know that we don't know at all, right? He comes up with very, very clever experiments where people confidently believe they know what they know, and then he shows you again what happened, and it's like the gorilla experiment. You realize, oh my gosh, I missed that too. And his idea is that many of the things and many of the topics of this course that we really, really believe are about human nature are really about a very select way of being in the world that we've been conditioned to, that we've been trained to, and that we're great at. That's like the single most frustrating thing about attention blindness. The things we're best at, the things we're expert at, the things we're proudest of, are also the things we're most focused on, which means we're leaving a lot of gorillas that we're not seeing. Where Dan's work and my work intersect, and it's one reason we're teaching this class together, is I am co-founder and the director of an organization called Haystack, which is a very long acronym, Humanities, Arts, Science, and Technology Advanced Collaboratory. We founded it in 2002. There's now about 10,000 members. It's an online virtual network of people dedicated to new ways of learning together that the internet has made possible. And our idea is, you know, it's really true that if you're counting those basketballs, you might miss the gorilla. But sometimes it's really important to count those basketballs. In other situations, it's really important to see that gorilla. So if you can take people who are looking for different things, who have different backgrounds, who have different expertise, different trainings, different focuses, different kinds of attention, together, collaboratively, you're actually able to work together very successfully. So I go into a lot of organizations like Google, where Dan is now, and work with people to take people who are very trained to a certain way of seeing the world and helping them to expand that world to see the things they're missing. And the best way of doing that is collaborating with somebody with different skills in order to make a project together where you're constantly looking at each other's expertise to seeing what your assumptions make you great at and at the same time make you blind to, literally blind to. One of the best ways of becoming aware of your own attention blindness is when you have to take what you know and translate that to somebody who doesn't share your assumptions or know it at all. Right? So this is why people often say you learn best by teaching, because when you teach, you have to deconstruct all the things you know and basically translate that to somebody else who doesn't know what you know in order that they can then share your assumptions or share your point of view or share your knowledge or share your expertise. So on the one hand, you're making them basically as attention blind as you are. Right? But in the process, an amazing thing happens. This also happens with culture shock. And it happens with Dan's experiments. You become aware of your own assumptions in a different way, right? Because as soon as you have to explain things that are automatic, those things are no longer automatic, right? You gain a self-consciousness about those things that used to be habitual. So lots of pundits right now are saying, oh my gosh, the internet is making us distracted, it's making us lonely, it's making us solitary, we're also, multitasking is bad for us, et cetera, et cetera. All they mean is a major new technology, a major intervention by a new technology has suddenly made us aware that our patterns are not working for us, right? And the us is probably a little different for me than it is for you, right? If you've hung around with a baby lately and you've given that baby an iPhone or an iPad, right? At 2 years old, at 1 year old, at 6 months, they're doing things with the iPad that even people your age probably had to learn, because I think tablets came out, what, about 5 years ago? Do you remember the first time you ever did a touch screen or a tablet? Okay. So you were learning a new kind of interface. For my generation, I've had to learn a lot of new interfaces. That means a lot of my habits don't work for me anymore. So I can either say, this is horrible, right? Civilization is going to the dogs. Right? The whole this younger generation doesn't know anything. They don't know the things I know, therefore they don't know anything. Or I can say, wow, I'm counting basketballs and there's a huge new gorilla in the room. Right? A lot of this course is about being able to figure out when they're in times of dramatic change where the gorillas are. Because we've been so well trained and we're so expert and so great at counting the basketballs. U.S. Department of Labor Statistics now says, now, not in your future, now, the average American changes careers 4 to 6 times. Not jobs, careers, right? Most of you have been on a pretty clear trajectory for a while now, right, towards a career. Isn't that interesting to think that your chances of changing that career are pretty high, right? The Australian government did a survey a few years ago, and they projected, this was a few years ago, now it would be a 15-year-old. About 65% of 15-year-olds today will be working in jobs that aren't invented yet. Right? So again, we live in a world where we prize expertise, where we prize specialization, where we prize a certain kind of knowledge, but we're in a world that's moving so fast that 65% of 15-year-olds are going to work in jobs that aren't invented yet. Right? The other purpose of this course is to train us all, includes me and Dan, and the group of instructors that will be working in this class, in how you learn, how you unlearn, and then how you relearn. That's a phrase by Alvin Toffler, the great futurist, who says the literacy of the 21st century isn't reading, writing, and arithmetic. The great literacy of the 21st century is the ability to learn, to unlearn, and to relearn. And those are 3 steps, full stop. Learn, unlearn. Unlearn is a process where you think about, okay, this is what I learned. What does that mean I'm not seeing? Right? What possibilities am I not seeing from that learning? And building on that to what you want to do next. The reason we call the course Surprise Endings is because we're trying to say that there's something really valid and important in grasping surprise, right? You can either say, it's horrible, right? Change is terrible. The world is horrible. Everything is horrible. It's going too fast. Or you can say, wait. In a world of surprise, we're constantly being disrupted from our attention blindness. It may mean that we're only counting 15 of the basketballs, not 16, or 13, not 14. But it may be that we can also see the gorilla, right? So that's what we're interested in. Again, Dan makes empirical experiments that catch us in our own surprises and that show us, that surprise us with what we don't know. Something he and I started talking about a few years ago is here he makes these carefully constructed empirical experiments to teach us about ourselves. Meanwhile, there are artists in the world who, without any empiricism at all, somehow managed to come up with these characters and these plots and these situations that are very much the same kind of things that tell us about the foibles of human nature. And really frustrating for a social science, and he can talk about this frustration when he gets here next week, really frustration is those artists have work that lasts for centuries, right? So we have wonderful conversations about what it means that some people have the gift of intuition, the gift of the artist, and who can somehow see those things that many of us are blind to, right? And what can we as rational, scientific people in the world learn from artists? And then, of course, there are things that artists have to learn from us as well, from scientists or people who work in areas of technology or social science as well. And how, again, can we put those things together? So that's kind of the content and the theory of the class. Each week we'll be reading a selected, the syllabus is much bigger now than it will be. You can, in groups we will be refining and defining the syllabus in more narrow terms. You won't be doing all the readings that are up there as suggested readings. But basically each week you'll be reading some very standard classic social science articles on a topic, and then you'll be either viewing a movie or a TV show or reading a work of literature that's on that same topic. And here's the fun part. Now we'll get to method. The method in this class mimics the content of the class, because the method of the class is all about taking what you think you know, turning it into a vehicle for teaching your classmates and teaching others. Okay? I'm talking today. Next week, the class is going to be prepared by the wonderful expert instructors who are going to be working in the class as sort of a model for what you'll be doing in the rest of the class. After that, you'll be working in project teams, and for each of the units, there's 8 subsequent units in the class. For each of the units, you will be figuring out how to conduct the class and how to run the class. There's certain principles. One, you'll be doing an online discussion first, a public discussion for all of the students in the class, but it will be in public. So one of the basics that we're going to do for all kinds of reasons to protect you and all of that is we're going to have everybody sign into the website with a nickname, right? So you'll be working in public, but you'll have the barrier and the protection of having a nickname. Now the nickname might be your first name if you want it. It can be, I don't know, Cat in the Stack is my avatar name. It can be any nickname that you want. We will know who you are. We'll have a sheet that has a key to who you are. But the world will only know you by your nickname. There will be trolls, right? Dan and I are both quite well known in the world, and we've had our share of trolls, so there will be trolls. Learning how to deal with trolls is one of the issues we'll be talking about in the class. But I don't want you to suffer in any way from that, so you will have a pseudonym. If you wish at any time to name yourself, you can. You know, any blog post, if you want to sign your name, you're welcome to do that. But everything officially will be done with the protection of a nickname. It just makes all kinds of things easier in the future for that. I hope, though, that you will end with a pretty cool portfolio for future employers and graduate school or whatever that you can show the kind of work that you've been able to do in this class. One thing you'll be doing online is starting to evolve interview questions. And the first 45 minutes or an hour of every class will be one person from your project team who's an on-air interviewer who will interview me and Dan. Dan and I have promised, we've done a lot of work to set up this class. As you'll see, there's a lot of apparatus in this class. We've done a lot of work to set up the class, but we're promising each other we're not going to talk to each other about his social science experiments or my literary texts that I've chosen. And the on-air camera will ask us questions, and he's going to answer from the point of view of a social scientist, a behavioral economist. I'm going to answer from the point of view of somebody who's trained in literature. And that, the first part of everybody's project will be editing that however long it is, I would say at the most hour long, and ideally short of that, into a segment that's a segment we'll put up on YouTube that'll have professional credits. It will have the same typeface throughout the whole class so that it looks consistent. And Duke is going to brand this as a Duke class for Duke on YouTube. And those interviews will be part of the apparatus of the class. Each one of them, no more than 45 minutes. Anyone in the public will be able to view those. That's the simple part. Okay. You'll then have the rest of the semester to think about the content in the readings you've done and in the interview that you've conducted and figure out how, if you could use the apparatus of the internet to teach the world those concepts, what is the most creative creative, imaginative way you could come up with. This is partly because my other role isn't as a literature professor, but I'm very, very involved in the world of online learning. And I'm outraged that people think this thing called MOOCs, are you all familiar with MOOCs, massive online open courseware, is about some famous professor staring into the camera and giving the same lecture they would give to 300 students in a classroom, and that constitutes, and then pop quizzes, and that constitutes an education. Everything we know about learning is you don't really retain learning, and you don't really take it and transform it until you do something with it. So the challenge of this, also it makes me mad that there's all this hysteria around MOOCs around the country, and nobody's asked students, what kind of learning do you want? What kind of learning do you want in your future? What kind of way do you learn best, right? We have research that shows the least successful form of learning is the lecture, right? For retention and for applicability, lectures rate very, very low relative to other forms of learning. So then we have MOOCs. But the one thing you learn from a lecture, the one good thing from a lecture, is we also know humans kind of like to do things in groups, right? We like to go to basketball games, we go to concerts, we do go to lectures, we go to religious services, right? There's something about fellow feeling when you're with other people expressing a similar emotion that seems to appeal to humans and virtually, I don't know of a culture where that's not the case, and certainly back through time, right? Some of the oldest excavations in human history are in fact crowds, places where crowds gather. Sporting events are another one. But in massive online learning, you take away the one part of the lecture that we know is important to humans, which is the fellow feeling among people sharing an experience together. So our challenge is going to think about what really would constitute a good, valid, interesting form of learning for the public that's going to be looking at this course. In writing my book about attention blindness, it's a book called Now You See It, and I think I've got enough copies that I can give everyone a free copy in the class. In writing my book, Now You See It, I interviewed, for example, magicians, right? Magicians are great at saying, look over here, and then the elephant appears here, right? That's why every magician has a very gorgeous assistant, right? I mean, the more you can train your eyes on the assistant, the more you can make the elephant appear. We know that. Why? Because we are creatures of culture and creatures of habit, and that's what we do. It's just like the basketball and the gorilla. I talk to pickpockets, professional pickpockets. And Dan is doing a great project now on dishonesty, where he's talking to people who are professional liars. Right? I talk to insurance adjusters. This was interesting, because when I was doing my book, everyone was saying, oh, texting is causing all these accidents, et cetera. Well, needless to say, if you're texting in traffic, you're kind of an idiot, right? I mean, that is hard. On the other hand, the insurance adjuster said, if you have a 16-year-old who's driving, sure, tell him not to text. But what you really need to do to keep him safe is remove the other seats in the car, because we know exponentially the number of accidents goes up relative to how many other people are in a car with a young driver, right? What all the insurance adjusters said to me too is they said, we don't put this on the insurance forms because nobody would ever have a valid case, but people will come in and say to us things like when somebody's been in an accident and they come to the insurance adjuster to tell about the accident, the insurance adjusters say, what they always do is they'll say, oh, it was already a terrible day, right? You know, I had a stomach ache, I had a headache, I was feeling miserable, and then this idiot hit me. And the insurance adjuster says, what they're really saying is, on a normal day, if I looked into my rearview mirror and I saw someone coming fast, my reflexes would be such that I could speed up. But I had a headache, I had a stomach ache, I wasn't responding as fast. Bam, there's an accident. That's all. Actually, when I started lecturing on this to Great American Insurance Company and other insurance adjusters a few years ago, somebody came up to me and said, well, what would be a great experiment that we could do to test this idea? And we talked together and we said, well, what's the most distracting day of the year? And it wasn't me that came up with this. This experimenter at the University of Chicago said, well, what about tax day? They said, sure, we already know Super Bowl Sunday has the most accidents in the year. It's 6%, 6%, that's substantial, more than any other day in the year, right? So what about tax day? Turns out more than Super Bowl Sunday, 6.7% more accidents on tax day than any other day of the year. Why? People are anxious, they're mad, they're annoyed, right? They have a deadline and they don't like it, and to do it correctly means you're going to have to pay money, right? What could be more annoying? And they get in 6.7% more accidents. That's significant, right? Because when we're focusing on one thing, we miss everything else. So you're going to be making course content. Maybe you'll want to invite a magician in for your course to make your points. Maybe you want to invite a pickpocket in to make your points. Maybe you want to do an animation, right? Maybe you want to make a game. Maybe you'll want to make a scavenger hunt. So the topics that we're going to be looking at are, again, classic topics in social science and in literature, it turns out. Attention blindness is the first one, and that's going to be done and modeled by our team of instructors in the class. That'll be on Monday. Self-control. That's the basic idea of why, when we know if we eat that piece of candy or that extra piece of cake, we're going to gain weight, and we say we're on a diet, why do we eat the piece of cake? Right? We do. We're very, very bad. Even when we know rationally that things aren't good for us, we're often very bad at controlling ourselves and not doing those things. So we're going to be looking at some social science experiments on that, as well as some classic work, actually not, some very contemporary actually some tough roughs. How many people have watched Breaking Bad? We're going to be looking at the first series of Breaking Bad. If anyone has problems with this, just be aware it's a little rough, and we can come up with an alternative assignment if it totally offends you to watch that show. The identifiable victim effect, why we sometimes are more sympathetic when we know the victim than when we don't, and sometimes it's the reverse. Relativity defaults, obedience, race, prejudice, and political correctness, social proof, that's basically peer pressure, gender and success, and dishonesty. So some pretty core human values that are also the subject of great works of literature, or popular works of literature. I think it's for Obedience, Evil, and Resistance that we'll be reading The Hunger Games, which I assume most of you read in high school. It actually follows the form of many dystopias. So it's going to be really interesting to talk about that very popular work right now in terms of a form that many people through the ages have used to talk about evil and when we do and don't resist evil. Okay. Those are the topics. So we have a wonderful team of people to help you this term, because I'm assuming everybody is going to learn at least one skill that they have never practiced before. So I'm hoping, and this goes back to your question about pedagogy, I'm hoping you leave this class not only knowing a lot more about social science and literature, not only about human nature, but that you actually have some tricks and tools that you can use yourself in the rest of your life. This is also a class that's going to be very much about management, self-management, peer-to-peer critique, how you give feedback and receive feedback, something we're very poor at. When I talk to business recruiters, I always hate to say this because I think your generation gets a lot of negativity from older people because we're jealous. Right? We're basically jealous. How many people were born after 1993? Some people were born before 1993? 1995? Earlier than that? Oh, you're old. April 1993 is when the Mosaic 1.0 browser goes public for the first time. That's the beginning of the information age. Right? Most of you probably don't remember the first computer you had in your house, the first internet connection. Is that right? Right. I used to be able to say to my students, you're going to become old fogies really fast because you're going to have younger brothers and sisters saying, really? You remember a time before the internet? But now my students really rarely. Can you remember a time in your life before the internet? Oh, there were some. Oh, cool. Okay, good. Lots of things we thought about human nature changed once it was possible to have a way to not just receive knowledge, but contribute to knowledge. One of the people I've interviewed in the course of my work is Jimmy Wales, co-founder of Wikipedia, right? 6th most trafficked site on the World Wide Web. When he started that in 2002, I said to him, how many people did you think would be interested in Wikipedia? He said, oh, a couple hundred, right? Rational choice philosophy in 2002, when he invented Wikipedia, would say it was not humanly possible to have a website where people would freely contribute knowledge without being paid, right? Would edit one another's knowledge without being paid, and it would become more reliable than any other standard reference book reference, and far more inclusive than any other reference existing anywhere in the world, right? And I'm not saying that. The archivist of the United States, David Ferriero, says that. Okay? It's now reached that level of standard through voluntary contribution. We didn't know that was possible. Right? We didn't know humans like to contribute that much. It's a positive side. The downside for most of you now is we so hyper-specialize the process of getting into college, and especially a great university like Duke, that business recruiters often say it takes 2 years to get somebody out of the mindset of, is my teacher going to give me an A? Am I going to get a perfect score? Are my GREs going to, or my MCATs or LSATs going to be good? To think in terms of, oh, I really don't know how to do this. Who do I have to talk to find out an answer to this question? It's a hard, it seems like it would be an easy skill, but in fact, collaboration is one of the hardest business skills to learn. That is going to be another skill that you will all be perfecting in this class. This class is very, very much about peer grading, peer evaluation, keeping track of who is contributing. The grading system is contract grading, right? You will literally, at the end of this class, have a contract. Are we going to pass out contracts? Yes. You will have a contract. Go home and read it, sign it, come back, someone else will co-sign it, and you will determine what grade you're going to get. And as long as you satisfactorily complete all of the assignments on that sheet, you will get that grade. If you want a B because you've got other things to do this term and you want to do less work, you can sign a B for a B. If you want a C because you've got lots of other more important things to do this term, you can sign for the C. And I will admire you hugely for making that kind of adult decision about your workload. Right? If you want to contract for an A, it's going to be a tough class. Just is. Right? The one place you cannot fail without a 2-point deduction is if you fail your project team. Because you get a 1-point deduction for not doing the assignment and a 1-point deduction for letting down your team, for other people having to do your work for you. So project, work in groups, collaborative work is going to be taken very, very seriously. Also, often people will say work in groups and then they don't give you any help. We're going to be doing lots of management training. And in fact, we have a very careful grid that will help you do evaluations and actually badge each other for their, not for doing badly, but for doing well. And so that we've got lots of systems in place. Again, this is what Dan and I do for a living. But interestingly, Dan and I do this outside of Duke. We've never before done it in a class. So the other reason we were motivated to do this in a class is, why are we doing this for, in my case, I've done it for the Great American Insurance Company, for Turner Broadcasting, for Google. I'm on the board of the Mozilla, I'm the first educator, in fact, on the board of the Mozilla Foundation. I do it for all these corporations. I've never done it really. I've done it a little bit, but not completely seriously in a class before. So many of the things we're going to be doing in here are the kinds of things I'd be doing if I were doing, working with an organization I work with here in town, Duke Executive Education, which is of professional trainers for global executives. Right? Dan too, he's out at Google, we're doing this right now. So much of what we do in this class is going to be teaching some of the training methods that global executives would be using, and giving you help, not saying, oh, you can figure out collaboration. No one's figured out collaboration. It's tough. And we will be giving us, that will be part, so again, the question of pedagogy, that's part of the pedagogy of this class. How can we learn together? How can we work together to take advantage of one another, and what kind of supports can we use in that process of working together?